all sorts of things. Well, I mean, this whole thing started as like, Matt and I are good friends, and he used to be a DJ at Channel Z down here in Springfield a long time ago, and we've always kind of worked in a performing, or like I've been in bands, and he's been in radio and been in theater and stuff. But it's like we were just talking. It's like we used to hang out a lot here in Columbia, Missouri. He moved to Kansas City, and we're like, we used to have just these conversations where we'd get fucked up every once in a while and call each other on the phone and be like, we should record these because some of these are kind of funny. And that's exactly how it started. And we were like, well, why don't we just like get on a computer and just have a phone call on the computer and just hit the record button and see what happens. And for like
totally a little bit of ego there, like
right. I'd listen to us. We're funny, right? We're hilarious.
Hey, I'm my favorite band, so I can relate.
I get exactly. It. Yeah.
A little ego there. But, more ego and less stage fright, I guess. So, yeah.
No, you just got to do it. It's all about the 10,000 hours is what his name is always talking about, right?
Right. Well, just hitting you up. It's like we don't know you. I don't know you, but I'm a fan of yours. I'm like, this guy's really interesting. He's a really interesting cat. You should check him out. And, and so we did. And we decided to look you up and just... It's like, I wonder if he'd do the podcast. And that's what we're finding is like that the cool people anyway that we talk to are willing to do it. And they're just like, yeah, why not? Right, sounds like fun. Yeah. So just, talking to a couple of nobodies, but we just like to do an online hang.
Yeah. We're all nobody. I mean,
essentially,
this is what we're doing.
We would love to make it to your level of nobody.
Oh,
yeah, absolutely.
You've got a pretty interesting life and career, it sounds like. So I really want to find out a little bit more about that.
Absolutely.
I'm Matt, by the way.
No, I'm Jon.
I'm Jon.
Yourselves. Do you go by Mike? I'm sure you don't go by that one guy. That's probably really hard to... Yeah.
No, I like both. I mean, when I came up, sorry, I'm switching this thing. When I came up with the name, it was more of a joke within a joke, and I thought it would be funny if somebody came up to me and said, "Hey, aren't you that one guy?" just because it's so ridiculous. And, and then actually it started to work, and
kind of lean into it. Yeah,
my career started to work, and the next thing I knew, they called me that one guy, and I like it. I don't know. It's just fun. It's fun to have
there's some novelty to it.
Yeah, to have an alias and a thing, stage. Not even a stage
it's a
name,
moniker, right?
Like your character name, or it's a moniker, or when it's Halloween and you go as Spider-Man.
That's right.
You want people to call you Spider-Man.
That's a way to put it.
It's fun. It's fun to be your.
Yeah, I talked to a friend of mine who lives out in Washington. I was just like, hey, I noticed because like I followed your page and liked it and stuff, and I noticed that he did too. And I was like, hey, I noticed that you follow that one guy. And then I realized after I typed it in, I was like, he knew exactly who I was talking about. He's like, yeah, man, absolutely. Awesome. Got the magic pipe. I was like, yeah. He's like, he's going to be in our podcast soon. It's like, oh, really? That's awesome.
Oh, that's awesome.
Listen to it. So, yeah. So, cool. Yeah, I mean, we can keep rolling and talk if you want to talk. We can do this again tomorrow night if you think it'd be like better prepared after going through all that shit with the gremlins with the computer, or if you want to set up a time. But I'll just kind of leave it up to you. I know you probably weren't necessarily prepared to like just sit and chat for a while, but
yeah, I'm never prepared for anything. So it's always like, if it's sometimes in the moment's the best for me.
We are,
We're kind of like that with our podcast. We found like when we try to prepare too much for it, then it just doesn't feel right.
Oh, I'm that same way. My live thing, the whole concept of going live is like just the biggest game changer for me, because I was trying to do a podcast. I was trying to keep it in podcast format because I'm such a fan of podcasting. In 2010, I started listening to a bunch and just been wanting to do one so bad, and I could never get it together. I practice podcasting. I script out outlines and stories of things I wanted to talk about, stories I wanted to tell. It always sounded so canned and never sounded like I was in the flow, sort of like I am when I play gigs, and and even gigs are that way. When I prepare and do all this stuff, it never matters. It's all about the moment. It's all about jumping in and like just winging it and improvising.
Well, and just having a conversation with
my
people,
core, I'm an improviser,
I mean, that's a big thing we find. It's like, I mean, we talked to a friend of ours who's in theater.
Yeah.
And, we talked to him in another podcast, and we're just like, you never bring, like we said before, you never bring like pages to the bar, and you're like, okay, Bill, here's what you're going to talk about tonight. Don't get off script.
Right. Totally. Yeah. No, there's nothing more annoying than forced dialogue or conversation, or it's a real exchange is where it's at. I mean, that's what the essence of being human is, I think.
Right. And that doesn't mean you don't practice and that you don't try and get better at what you do. But like my favorite bands are the ones that can sound really polished and really raw at the same time, if that makes sense.
Right.
Oh, totally. I mean, that's punk rock, right?
Yeah.
That's why it sounds good to us. It's like when something's too overproduced or somebody's trying too hard with music, it's like, it's not fun to listen to. It's not a party. It's like you want to hear somebody's inspiration coming through, shining through. That's the stuff that inspires us, makes us want to do our thing.
Right. You can tell they're in control, but they aren't power hungry with it almost, if that makes sense. They're like letting it breathe on its own too and be its own entity.
Yeah. Well, that's hard. It's so hard to learn how to work really hard, but not give a shit,
Yeah.
That's like, God,
well, and that's one thing I want to talk about. Just, with your body work, it's like, I find anyway, I found lately, we've been interviewing some performers, musicians, stuff like, you don't want to sound like an egghead, like you know everything about somebody, because nobody likes that. But you also don't want to sound like you don't know anything about the person that you're talking to, because fans get really pissed at that, apparently. But it is a fine line. So what can you tell us though about that? Like, line. Because you studied music in like a conservatory type setting, didn't you? Or is that where you come from? Yeah. So what was that?
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's my background, but I'm still studying music. We're always studying, but like, whenever I study magic too. I study sleight of hand, and me and my teacher talk about this all the time, because when people claim to be self-taught, it's just not, it's never true. Anybody that's worked hard at anything is studying it the whole time, and we all have teachers, even if we're just doing everything on Google and YouTube. It's like we're probably studying the masters, because we're connecting with them on that, in that medium. But of course, it's always way better to have your, hang out with your mentors and have them show you stuff. But I had killer teachers when I was a kid. Luckily, I kind of got lucky. And then when I got to the college age, I went to the conservatory music, and I went to this jazz school too. And again, I was my own teacher there, because, it's still about just throwing yourself into it. And it's all who you're connecting with, who you're playing with, your peers or your teachers and your mentors too. You want to hang out with them and just try to soak it up.
What was what do you think was your first big turn on that just kind of made you go in that direction? Was there a particular band? Was there a particular, not just talking about just a laundry list, but
let me think, because early on, my dad's a jazz bass player. So there was always music, in the house. And then, but then I wanted to play, me and my best friend, we wanted to be Kiss. And it's so weird that we're bringing this up in this moment, because last night I was listening to all 4 of the Kiss solo records, because I just have this weird memory. I hadn't really listened to those. It was always like my best friend's older brother, who he was like this important figure for us, because he had Kiss records, but then he was super into, at the time, contemporary, like early 80s LA hardcore music, and which is stuff you would never hear on the radio. So we were hearing him play that in his room. He wouldn't show us it, but we could hear it, and it was like blowing our minds. And then,
share it.
What's that?
He didn't want to share it.
No, he was just older and way too cool, and we were just scared to death of him because he was a punk rocker dude,
out there.
Like a real one, and we were just these dumb kids listening to our Kiss records. So it was like those two things, and it was all just kind of like this inaccessible thing it was just hard. When you're a kid, you can't even try to understand it. You can just kind of like listen to it and check it out and try to
wrap your mind around where those people are.
Really,
I mean, it's hard.
Totally. Because like a couple years later, it was Rush. That I got really, really into, and then I got so lucky because there was this kid in the orchestra in the junior high school whose dad bought us Rush tickets and took us to the concert. And I remember just like not even knowing how to deal with it. Like the whole week before, I was having these dreams about what I thought it might be like, to actually see it for real. Cause I just couldn't even, it's almost like it wasn't a reality. It was this thing that I listened to on a record, and it wasn't a tangible thing that was going to be a real experience. And then I remember being in the arena and even watching the opening band, and it was cool, but not even really the reality of the situation hadn't even hit me till like all the lights go down and they play the intro music, which was the Three Stooges, and the Three Stooges comes on. And I'm like, oh my God, they're in this room with us. They're like somewhere in this arena. And like, all of a sudden I just couldn't even kind of like wrap my head around it, and they came out, and it was such an overwhelming experience. Like they start with Spirit of the Radio, and I didn't even know that song because all I knew was Moving Pictures and the new record. Those are the only ones I had, and it was my favorite band still, and like half of the show was stuff I didn't know that was the best Rush stuff, and I remember like there was so much information. I was so overwhelmed that like the next day I had to wake up and go to school because it was a school night, and I woke up and I couldn't remember any of it. Like I was trying so hard to retain everything, and I couldn't remember. Like it was like a weird dream, and there was all this weed smoke in the air and stuff too, because all the grown-ups were smoking the jazz cabbage.
The grown-up, quote unquote.
Yeah, exactly. Well, they all, the teenagers are like 50-year-olds to you,
Right.
And the other thing too was like walking through the parking lot, and every single like 1981 Trans Am was playing Rush songs really loud. Like it was just like this cacophony of Rush. It was such a heavy thing because I had nobody to prepare me for that part of the dealio either.
Well,
so,
I mean, I think there was a difference though with those shows, that they were kind of like a carnival atmosphere. And a lot of
totally.
And I think some of those best shows were when you went on a school night with an older brother or something. You went to see AC/DC, because he took you because he was like, okay, I'm willing to see AC/DC, so I'll take you to go see the show. And then it's just like that. There's a circus atmosphere in the parking lot. You go see those bands, and you hear this catalog that you hear like 2 songs on the radio, or your buddy turns you onto a 7-incher or something, and that's all you get. And then I was like, wow, there's a mystique about these guys. There's a character about them. Rush, that had to be a good one. That had to be a good one for an intro.
That's funny because the last podcast I had a friend on, and we talked about going to our first Rush shows just on the last podcast, and for me, Rush was more of one of those. I thought they were okay. The first couple of times I'd listen to him, and then a friend's like, you really need to go see him. And I'd heard, okay, you really need to go see him. And then just once I was there, it's like, okay, I get it now. Because there was just like this energy that came from it, and just watching them and just seeing how, like when you're there and they're in front of you, you can really just feel how immensely talented everyone in that band is. And watching Geddy Lee go crazy, and just he's mastered those pedals. Even he can do 5 things at once and still nail it all. And just wow, how do you do that? And then the spectacle all around while that's going, it's just crazy.
Oh yeah, no, it was completely immersive and overwhelming, and they're still my favorite band, and I've seen every single tour since. It's not even that any of that has ever changed. This is just the complete immersion and the introduction to their live show. And like you say, like I had no idea that it really, I knew it was 3 guys, but I didn't even understand the dynamic, how intense a power trio can be until you see what they're even capable of. And then you're like, oh my God, this is really happening. Like, yeah, seeing where all the sounds are coming from, because it's a whole orchestra on the record. And I would just listen to it on my headphones, just get lost in it.
Mm. Yeah. Because from what I understand, I mean, you started playing, the upright bass, correct? Is that?
Yeah. I started them both roughly at the same time, because my dad had an upright bass in the house. Mm-hmm. And that's like a real rare kind of stroke of luck to, grow up with that instrument around you. I mean, nobody does. A lot of people maybe have a piano in the house or a guitar or something, but definitely an upright bass. Such a
they're not cheap for a good one. One thing,
they're not cheap, and it's just and they're such a weird instrument anyway.
Talent, but it's beautiful sound, but.
Oh, it's an amazing sound. I wanted to play electric bass. I didn't even really want to do that, but my dad really kind of talked me into it, because he was explaining that if I could play jazz and I could play rock and I can kind of play a little bit of everything, that I could work, and because his career, started with zero knowledge, and he was literally in the band room his senior year or junior year, I can't remember, the orchestra room, and he was playing around on the upright bass, because he has this amazing ear, but he's got no training or anything. He's just really good at picking things up. And he said these guys came up to him and said, "Oh, we didn't know you played bass. We need a bass player for tonight. We have a gig." And he's like, "Oh, okay, yeah." Most you guys there just took the bass from school, and and then ended up making his living with music for the next 10 years with just the limited kind of stuff he figured out that night, which is
Did
crazy.
He get recorded?
That's crazy.
Did he get recorded?
What's that?
Did he have an album out or anything, or did he?
They did some recording, not a lot though. Back then, you didn't really record unless you were gonna, make a record for Blue Note or something. But the amazing thing was who was in his band. I mean, when they got to the City College, which is like the junior college, he had Jim Keltner was his drummer, who's he's a heavy, played on like every Bob Dylan record back then, and like Ringo's records, and he played on John Lennon's, Double Fantasy and stuff. Like, he's a heavy, but back then he was just one of these session guys that was playing with everybody, even though he was, he was like 18, 19 years old. And Ed Lejeski, who was this famous arranger on piano, and all these different players that, when you're coming up, that's what you do. You play gigs at the social clubs, and, they ended up playing, 6 nights a week at Charlie Brown's down in Southern California. And he made a living. He paid his way through USC Business School playing jazz 6 nights a week, which is a story you never hear. Thing. Most people are like, I tried to figure out a way to support my music career with this job. And he had no ambitions to actually, play professionally his whole life. He just did it, and it paid really well, better than any job he could get at that age, and just used it to fund everything else he was doing. And then, by the time he was married and had a career, he just kind of put it down. And that's sort of when I found it, and he explained it to me. He's like, you can pretty much work and be a professional musician if you play this instrument, but nothing else, because, if you choose saxophone, you got to compete against people that actually want to work really hard and have real ambition, and you're going to have to, be that good. And that's really hard to do. Or you can pick this instrument that nobody plays and just kind of like write your own ticket, and he was right. Cause like I started playing, and when I was in 7th grade, I was already in like 4 bands, and at the junior high school, 3 of them were with people at the high school, that were way older, way better than me. And I could barely even play, didn't even know where the notes were, but they needed a bass player, and I'd always have this incredible experience when I'd go to jam with them the first time, because so many of them would have never played with a bass player. Like, they were a metal band that was just, guitars and drums and just jam together. And then you show up and you just play the same part as the guitar player's playing, and they're looking at each other like, oh my God, listen to how good it sounds with bass, because there was nobody to play with. What's that?
Where have you been all our lives?
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, I could play the 3 or 4 notes, and it was so interesting, and then by the time I was 15, 16, I joined this, I got my whole rig set up. So,
nice. That's first thing. First thing in my mind went
to was going through my rig.
We're about to get to get our own performance here.
It's all here.
Bringing the gnar from the
vein. But yeah, it was just, it's that funny thing where you can kind of, if you can get lucky enough to pick something that nobody else does, you really can write your own ticket. And that's always been the way I've been searching since then for sort of my path, is like, well, I'm going to pick the thing that not too many people are doing. And maybe I'll have an easier time instead of, if you go to law school to be a lawyer, that doesn't guarantee anything, because there's so many people that are trying to do that understand that it's such a lucrative career and have a real talent for it and are super ambitious. You're going to be competing against, thousands of people that are really excited to try to do this, and you better be just as excited or you're not going to have a chance. Or if you're just super talented at it. But,
no,
for the most part, it's hard.
Yeah, I think you're selling yourself short, though. I mean, especially when it comes to, like you're talking about. So, and here's where it comes in. It's just like the invention of instruments. I mean, where does that? I mean, like the magic pipe and that development and stuff like that. It was just, that you felt that you couldn't like go any farther with this or that, or I mean, how does that come about that you decide that I need to make something new, something that's never been on this planet before?
Yeah, I had started my solo act, and there was like two different versions of it. I love this idea of trying to be a one-man band. It's always kind of captivated my imagination, and I thought, and also it was very much rooted in kind of logistics, because when I would play professionally with these jazz groups and stuff, it wasn't my music, and those gigs always seemed to pay the best. And then my music, my band, my original stuff, the stuff I was writing, for my whole band, that paid $40 for the whole band to split, all seven of us, and or nothing, most of the time. And we did it. We weren't obviously doing it for the money. We were doing it because this was our band. And then we'd get an opportunity to open for a big name in town, and there'd be a ton of people there. And that's the greatest thing in the world. That's what you want to be doing. And there's just no money there because you're not bringing the crowd they are. And it's just not about the money. It's the last thing that even comes up. It's like, we got this gig opening for Fungo Mungo in the Bay Area, and we're so excited, and it's not, well, how much does it pay? There's that's like that never comes up. But, we did hit this point where, I was actually making my living doing it. I was playing 10 nights a week with different jazz groups and all these things. And one night a week would be my band's gig, and we'd be, $40 for the whole band to split. I remember thinking, God, if I could do this by myself, I could keep the $40. That's not bad. And I kind of figured that part out, and then I could sell a few CDs and that kind of thing. And I remember thinking this could be a path to something interesting. And I tried it, and I really struggled. Being a one-man band initially as a bass player was so counterintuitive and just not easy. And I've always thought as a bass player, I've always been a rhythm section guy. I've always been, a rhythmically thinking musician. I'm not a melody guy, And so to play an acoustic guitar and accompany yourself with your songs, that's something that kind of comes very naturally to a lot of songwriters. That's never been my path or my method. And so I ended up kind of trying to find my way, and mostly it was like exploring sounds. Let's plug into different pedals. Let's go into harmonizers. I just started going down that path really deep. And the next thing I knew, I thought I'd hit the wall where the instruments were concerned. I was like, I need to be making more sounds. I can't just go thump, 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 and I thought I got to build my own instrument. And that really was the catalyst.
Well, I think one thing that's really cool too is that you're constantly doing mods to it and shit, and you're constantly adding new stuff, and you're, and that's, it's amazing to me that you didn't just hang it up after a while and just say, okay, made this one, gonna just write that out. But watching like Radio 1 guy and seeing your new additions and stuff like that is just, that's amazing to me. I never really got into that element of it, like your MIDI work and things like that are just amazing to me, man. I think it's impressive.
Well, the funnest part about the broadcast is that I can share this stuff with people, because it's that part of it has never been the most interesting part to me. I always just wanted to play, you know, and I got the instrument right away. I got it to a place where it was good enough to make sound and get me through a gig. And right then I kind of just started playing gigs all the time. And, you know, it was still duct tape and wires and everything's hanging off. And I didn't push the instrument that much farther for a long time. It was good enough. So I was using it. And then it was sometime when I started doing this and I started learning, you know, I started getting way deeper into MIDI mapping and networking all these different machines, so I could do, you know, the light show and the video show and all this stuff.
It's complicated.
And hanging out it gets so deep and so complicated, and you can get lost. You know, you can get lost in that stuff, and you know, and kind of not play music and just start freaking out on filters and
like when I started in radio, you know, it was kind of an interesting time because I was like right at the cusp of when things were really starting to change in radio. Like the first radio station I worked at, we still had turntables in the studio, you know, and we had just introduced a CD player. So I would go from playing records to playing CDs in the studio, and, you know, I have the reel to reel that we'd record stuff on. And that all that's all in the past. It's all digital. And, you know, as all the new stuff started getting introduced, I started getting more and more intimidated by it. Like, I know what to do with these other things. I know there's a tactile element to it. Like, I still like to, and John and I talked about this, like, we like to get CDs and vinyl because there's like this tactile.
Sure, you got the liner notes, you got the sleeve, you got the artwork, you got all that stuff and the feel of it. Yeah, that's important.
Oh, totally. I've been doing a ton of research where with engineers and producers, because I'm trying to finish this new recording, and there's this mixer that I like. This guy, Chris Lord-Alge, and I've been watching his tutorials, and he uses the big SSL console and the big recordings. And he was talking about that same thing, and it was super enlightening to me because I'm the same way. I want to turn a knob and make a sound. Right. You know, I want to hit a string and make a sound. You know, I don't want to, you know, hit a mouse and click on a thing. There's just nothing inspiring about that. And you know, the inspiring part about that is the sound it makes, but the tactile thing that you're describing is exactly what we really crave. That's what we want to do as creators of sound and manipulators of sound and video or whatever we're doing. And actually, I found, you know, I went down the rabbit hole just 2 nights ago with these guys, and I found another interview with Bob Clearmountain and Chris Lord-Alge. These are like, this is producing nerd stuff, but he was talking about exactly what you were just saying. He's like, you know, I feel sorry for these kids in a way that can just pull up a plugin and have this instant amazing sound. We had to kind of figure out how to do it by, like, you know, running the tape machine into this other thing and then running it in. You know, we were chasing one sound and it would usually come out sounding different. Right. And it was a sound that we could have never imagined. And it was so exciting because there was so much work and we got the sound. Then we had to capture it because that was going to be it. We were never going to get it exactly that way again. And it's such a temporary thing, and it's such a beautiful pursuit. And you know, and both these guys are using computers a lot now, but it's sort of like, even with the computers, when you pull up these plugins and you pull up these consoles and stuff, they all have knobs. They all have sliders. They all have fake wood grain on the sides of the plugins.
You're clicking with a mouse to roll a knob with that. You're like,
which is completely stupid, you know, because but they have to feed us something that's relatable so we can put it into context. We can't, you know, there shouldn't be a knob.
Ones and zeros.
You know,
ones and zeros are to cut it. Yeah.
There's no gear, you know, there's no anything. It's like inside this virtual world, and it's incredible, but our brains can't process or can't handle the fact that there's no thing. So it gives us a picture of a thing so we can pretend that we're turning the thing. But, you know, I saw this DJ. There's these DJs that I run into on the road, and there was this guy with Serato, which is that virtual DJ software. Where, you know, he's got 2 turntables and these fake records. It's awesome. And the fake records put out test tones or tones rather, or SMPTE code or whatever it is, and runs it into the computer so it can play all the music that's inside the computer, and it can simulate this technology from the 1930s, right? Really, whenever record players came out. And I remember looking at it thinking, God, this is so funny. And it hit me. And so I asked him, hopefully he wasn't offended, but I was like, isn't it weird that we're still using these devices though to simulate? It's like if we had invented light speed and we had this spaceship that can travel at light speed, but on board we had a coal burning simulator.
Right. We made it look like a Corvette.
Yeah.
So we have something to relate to.
Yes.
Not
just
a pod. We need to have fins,
It's a flux capacitor, but you're shoveling in fake coal to it. So you're sort of burning something so you could feel like, like there's consumption of fuel happening that I can relate to. And he actually laughed, but I don't know, maybe he thought I was an idiot.
I've been kind of curious, like, I know you've got this really unique and interesting instrument that is there another one? I guess is what I'm wanting to, how do you, because I would imagine just thinking of like our recent technical issues, just trying to get things going. What happens if that goes down? I worry about that.
You mean, is there like a backup magic pipe?
Oh, I fix it. That's all that I can do. I try to be as redundant with, stuff, with parts and pieces and the pieces of the puzzle. I try to have redundant parts of everything, or just kind of be in a place or have the pieces that can enable me to fix. I thought about having a total backup rig, but it's just never worked out. I mean, this is the third version of the instrument that I've built from scratch. And it's basically like started, with the plumbing pipe in the Home Depot, and I was literally, God, I got to turn that thing off. Sorry, I got to.
You're fine. It's fun. I'm kind of tickled.
It is cool.
That saves us money in production. We don't have to hit sound effects.
Totally. In 2008, talk about a setback. I had my van stolen with everything in it. And it was in the middle of a tour. I had to just bail on the tour because I had no way to do the tour. And I had to rebuild the whole thing from scratch. And I went to an engineer, a machinist engineer, to help me because I thought maybe he could help me do it quicker because I kind of needed a new instrument in a pinch. And it ended up being like forever to rebuild the thing because everything was in my head and I didn't know how to articulate it or explain it. I didn't have any plans or backup schematics of anything. My brain didn't work like that. It was the process to build the thing was to walk down the aisles and go, hey, let's try this for a bridge. Let's try this for a headstock. Wow. And, and I'm telling him, hey, I made a headstock out of this C-clamp thing. Can we simulate that? And he's like looking at me like I'm speaking some other language, and I was like, oh boy. So it took us a month just to start communicating, and he's a really smart guy. And I thought this project would be, way beneath him because it's, he worked on the Phoenix Mars lander. Wow. I'm trying to put a string on a pipe. Yeah. That's all in my mind, that's all I'm doing. And in his mind, he's like, this is like, we're trying to create a time machine here. I'm like, we're not.
Maybe you're overthinking.
But it's funny. It just goes to show you that when something is unfamiliar, to somebody, it just doesn't matter what their background is or how smart. They have to have a capacity for learning a new thing and figuring something out.
Communication is important. It shows you a language.
Which I was with that, and I always thought I was a good communicator, but for this, I wasn't. I was trying to explain the pieces of the puzzle, and I just couldn't. There was no words for it. I was like, I just, and I did everything the long way, and I did everything backwards too. I always have because I don't know the hell I'm doing. But I had a metal file, and I filed, one of the pieces of the pipe down for a nut so the string would go through like a guitar nut, And, that took me like 2 days, and I burned out my elbows with this file, and I remember showing this is when I first built the instrument, and showing this other friend of mine going, look what I made, look what I did. And he goes, wow, how'd you make the nut like that? I'm like, I took a metal file and I completely destroyed my hands and my elbows. And he goes, oh man, I have a tool that could have done that in 3 seconds. You should have just come over. And I'm like, I didn't know they made a tool that did that. I just didn't know, and half of the stuff I build, I don't know. I just don't know what I'm doing. I just kind of go for it. And, And I mean, what other choice do you have?
Well, right. And it's not like you're going to be a master of all trades. Like, okay, there's a tool that does. How many tools are there out there? There's nothing out there. There's nobody out there doing exactly what you're doing with that. It's a very unique thing. So how could you be expected to have?
Right. And having the feel for it too. I mean, is certainly a part of it. I mean, you were talking about like the the time machine earlier, and it's just like I'm looking over here at this Telecaster I've got, and it's like those knobs I've got, they definitely make a sound, but nothing feels like running your hand underneath that volume knob, and that click, and it's like there's some tactile, and not only the tactile thing, but just the feel that you get through your body. It's like, okay, I know as I move this, it's going to crank this up a certain degree, and it's going to change the pitch of this, or it's going to, you just can't explain that to people.
It's an instrument. It becomes an instrument, and it's so funny we're talking about this because this is something I literally only kind of started thinking about 2 days ago, because I've hit this massive wall with my recording where, I'm trying to do a bunch of sound design and stuff on my own, kind of for the first time, because usually I go to recording studios and I just kind of create everything in the studio when the clock is ticking and the money's burning, and I haven't wanted to do that on this last one. I wanted to kind of do it all alone, and I've been finding the computer editing stuff super uninspiring, and the sound design, the creating with the synthesizers. And every time I go online to look for stuff, and then all of a sudden I see a guy with like a modular synth, with all these knobs and all these wires, and he's just turning stuff and plugging stuff in and making these incredible sounds.
Sorry,
you should sample that sound. That's Matt's dog. It's kind of a running joke on the podcast. I don't know if you've listened to anything we have, but I mean, whenever he lives in Kansas City, so like whenever a siren goes by, his dog just goes ape shit and imitates the siren. We usually let it go. Sorry, we probably should have warned you, but yeah, they live like 2 blocks from a hospital, and it's funny to me. I sit there and listen to it, and I just think it's hilarious. But
it's kind of like our version of living next to the train tracks.
That's Ginger. Sure. That's Ginger dog. She likes to imitate the wailing of sirens going by the house. And I like to listen to Matt get uncomfortable and squirm when she does it. So.
No. But
sorry.
Yeah, back to the recording stuff and just kind of trying to find those sounds and stuff. I always find that really interesting. I was listening to an interview with the record company. Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with them? They're kind of a newer act that's out, but one of them was talking about, I think it was them, finding a guitar in a dumpster. Mm-hmm. And the car, it just had like such a unique sound, and it was kind of technically a wrong sound. Like the way that the guitar was working, it almost worked like in the reverse way. Like it would, like what was pulling in the sound almost instead of putting out the sound, if that makes sense. It was like an acoustic. But it was such an interesting sound to them that they wanted to keep it. And they like used it to record stuff. And somebody offered to fix it, and they were like, "Don't you touch it." Mm-hmm. They found such an interesting sound with that. And I like those kinds of stories.
Yeah, that's serendipity, I think, when there'll be no other guitar that'll ever make that sound. Right. They'll like, that was the other interesting thing with the, I got my instrument in 2000. I was 99 when I finished it, but it was sewage pipe with duct tape and triggers and things. And like, I actually worked on it for the next 8 years and got it really playing well. But in my mind, it was just this giant piece of junk, like I could have done it better. I'm sure I could be doing this better. I'm sure if I consulted with a few more people, I could kind of make things better. It was sounding pretty good. So I thought. And then the interesting thing was when it was stolen and I rebuilt the first replacement, I couldn't get it with this guy from NASA. It was like, it was not as good. I hated it, actually. I was fighting this thing because I couldn't figure out why. Because my whole thing was, we're going to build it way better and bigger. It's going to be way more, bitching. And it just wasn't. And then it took till version 3, which is this one. to kind of catch up to the piece of junk that I made at the Home Depot. And even this one, I've rebuilt the rebuilds. Like I've upgraded all these different parts of it. So it plays better. It sounds better. I've replaced all the triggers and the buttons and stuff. So, my hands aren't black and blue after the gigs. I've figured out ways to actually make it better and not be afraid. But it's a weird thing when you just kind of find and stumble onto stuff like that guitar in the dumpster. It's just, it's I don't know. Yeah. It's almost like divine, design. I always think it's like, why do we get lucky like this? How come that thing in the dumpster is the perfect thing? And it's like, you're ready for it. It was the right time. You had no specific ideas, but for some reason it's channeling out through this thing. All this stuff's happening. And then you go and buy a $5,000 instrument. It's not
right.
As cool,
and we get these kind of artificial ideal of what's better.
Right. Or so you think.
Yeah. Or so we think, or we think we even know. Yeah. Artificial's a good way to say it. We think we even know what's better. We don't,
Well, and if you see if you see the wiring under the board in a Gibson Les Paul Gold Top, it's pretty ugly under there.
Sure.
The finish.
And why can't anybody make a better guitar than that?
Right.
Why that's from what, the 50s? Mm-hmm. That design, that Les Paul design, or earlier.
Right.
I can't remember.
Earlier.
Like every good band and every good rock band, and he wasn't even, Les Paul wasn't even a rock and roller much. He was more of a jazzy guy. Mm-hmm. He didn't build it for to be in to play Guns N' Roses songs, but that's the guitar. And like
place,
that's the guitar for every rock and roller.
So what about not only instruments, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about like-minded cats. Frankenstein Brothers and working with Buckethead, and
he plays Les Paul.
He does play Les Paul. Yeah, he does. The white one last time I saw it, pretty nice. But I mean, hooking up with guys like that, I mean, was that also? I mean, because some of our listeners might not be familiar with him. I am, but he's definitely a different player, definitely a different character of a person. How did you two guys meet up?
It's so interesting because he's originally from Southern California, but when I was in the Bay Area, that was another lucky break for me. Was the scene around like the late 80s, early 90s was so interesting and inspired and unique. All the local bands, like Primus, for example, was a local band, and we'd go see them. We'd go see them for $5 at the Berkeley Square, and that was like this life-changing thing for me, just going to see those shows because I was studying music a lot, trying really hard to find the good stuff, studying jazz. I thought jazz, fusion, funk, those were the best musicians, even though in my heart, I kind of liked punk rock better and I kind of liked Rush better and stuff. Yeah. But, you kind of do what your teachers kind of explain to you to do. And you kind of
makes you move your ass, though. It really does. I mean,
No, yeah. I mean, I was going to the stuff I liked, but then I remember going to see Primus at the Berkeley Square, for $5, and just because these friends of mine were going, and I just couldn't believe how cool it was, and I couldn't believe how it literally sounded like something that had never been done before. Right. That's what it kind of had a Rush thing. It kind of had a Stanley Clarke vibe. It had elements of these things that I was familiar with, but I had never heard it combined in a way. And then it was so angular and kind of ugly. I didn't know you were allowed to do that. I didn't know that was
it's kind of like a familiar dish, but with new seasoning.
Right.
Absolutely. Or, a familiar dish with new seasoning, and then suddenly the taste is like a completely different, like it's not even food anymore. You're like, oh my God, but I didn't know paprika with, lime could do that or whatever, bad example. But yeah, I went into my teacher the next day. I had a bass lesson the next day, and I was trying to explain to him what I saw. And I was kind of asking him, am I allowed to do this? Right. Like, is this, and am I wrong to think this is cooler than this other stuff. And it was such a big deal. You know, it was such an amazing thing. And every time we'd go see Primus or these bands, we'd get our minds blown by somebody else. You know, there'd be some other weird thing that would be opening for them. And this one time it was Mr. Bungle.
You're talking like to the ultimate Bungle fan, right?
Oh yeah. These were the shows, man, because like the first time I saw them, they were the opening band for Primus, and we'd read about them because there was a review of their demo, and you know, we were so used to seeing interesting stuff before Primus that we thought, okay, it'll be another cool thing. And the first gig was super weird because they were coming down from Arcata, and the saxophone player had their gear truck had broken down, and then it got like impounded or something. I can't remember what the deal was, but they showed up with no gear, and they had to borrow a bunch of gear, and it wasn't a very good show. It was like kind of a mess, you know. And they were a messy band anyway, but we were me and my friends were just they were going, like we didn't. It was not. We were ready to just get killed, you know, and it wasn't that great. And I remember thinking, but it seemed like you could see that they were supposed to be good, you know? And so afterwards I went and bought their demo from the guitar player, from Trey. He was selling their OU818 for $5, and I bought it from him. And you know, you open up the demo, and like it was Xeroxed paper that could fold out like 20 times, and it was all the lyrics and all this crazy weird shit, you know,
crazy artwork,
bizarre stuff. And I put it in my mom's minivan, which I used to borrow to take us to these shows because we were all 16, you know, and we put it in, and it's just the most amazing recording. It's so incredible. And it was I remember it said recorded by David Bryson at Dancing Dog Studios, and he's the guitarist from the Counting Crows, you know, and because they have the studio, and he would do all these bands as demos for who knows how much, not much, you know. And it was this pristine, really high level, high production, you know, recording, and it was so good. And me and my friends were just like freaking out. And we got back, everybody wanted to borrow it, so I started loaning it to one friend at a time, and they would tape it. That's what we used to do. And it eventually like left me for like 3 weeks, and then came back to me, and everybody in my whole school had that demo because of me, you know, like it was, that was the way we did it. And we just were tripping on that demo. And then they came back and did a headlining show at the Stone, and we all went, and the Deli Creeps were the opening band, you know. And nobody had heard of them. They literally came up for this one gig. They had never played in the Bay before. And somehow Mike Patton knew about them or was a fan. And Bucket later told me how that happened, but I can't remember now. But they played, and I'll never forget it because there was 5 bands on the bill, and they were the opening band. You know, they were just these weirdos, and nobody got it. You know, everybody's just standing there. And there's Buckethead doing his thing, and Maximum Bob, who's just like total psychopath, you know, and this whole Texas Chainsaw Massacre dynamic vibe. And, you know, we could, again, same experience. Like, I know this is good, and I know I like this, but I'm just not ready for it. Like that would happen every time. And then some time went by, and then people started writing about them. And then it was weird. I was in this band. This is maybe a year later, and we got to open for the Deli Creeps because then they got huge in the Bay. And that was the funniest part, because that's actually the first time I got to meet him. And back then it was different because, you know, this is way, way before, you know, any of the Zorn stuff.
Oh yeah.
Obviously way before the Guns N' Roses thing. There wasn't, you know, I think in the guitar community, they were talking about him a lot, but you know, and yet there was still this sort of legendary vibe going on. And this band was so weird and interesting. And we all met all the guys, you know, in the band, and everybody was super cool, really nice, which is always a really a life affirming experience. You meet interesting cats, and they're really cool, you know, and so it was funny because then that band split up right away, and Bucket went off to do his thing, you know, and I mean, years go by, and I end up opening up, you know, I start my thing, blah, blah, blah. He joins Guns N' Roses, quits Guns N' Roses. Like, man, all these things happen, obviously, within, let me think. So it was 91, 2006. So 15 years go by, you know, and kind of a lifetime of things. And and I end up opening up for him on a whole tour. I got offered a tour to open for him, and that's where we end up connecting and just hitting it off, and he kind of remembered us opening, because this is probably, this is in 91. So, you do the math in terms of,
it's been a while.
Yeah. Kids, we were pretty much kids at that point, both of us, and so, but we both, it was so fun to talk about those times, because
it was an exciting period.
It
was such an exciting period. I hate being that old guy that talks about where were you when the alternative music revolution happened, but it really was a thing, because I was in this like top 40 band in the late 80s, and me and all my musician friends would talk about what the potential of being a professional looked like, and for us it was like, well, crappy pop music is things that make money, so I guess we have to figure out how to do that, because that was really, and it felt so counterintuitive. And that's why when I went and saw those bands that were underground at the time, I was like, oh my God, people are doing cool stuff,
Yes, they are.
And then I'd go to the band practice and we'd argue about it. And the guys in my band, my top 40 band, would say, well, you can never, make money doing that. It's cool. It's cool. I agree with you. It's cooler, than New Kids on the Block.
Nixon mask. You can't come.
Yeah, exactly. I was trying to explain to them what like the Mr. Bungle show looked like, and like what, every time you saw Mr. Bungle, it was a totally different thing. They would, it was the super high concept, weird costumes, weird ass shit. And it was still very underground, like it wasn't, these are those old weird club shows. So they come out and just like, do Welcome Back Carter in Spanish, and then like run off the stage and pretend that they're going to leave, like after the first song. Like it was just rad, it was just, it was so like interesting and fun, and like just fun in the bottom line. And I end up watching this stuff become the mainstream. It happened really fast, because I remember even when Primus started playing at the Omni, which was like, that's the bigger club. That's like I'm trying to say Kansas City terms. That's like, we always used to see them at the Bottleneck, and now they're playing the Granada. You know what I mean? Right. And that's what it was. Like the Omni was the slightly bigger room, and we're like, dude, they're getting big. They're getting huge. Like they were almost selling out to us at that point. We're like, I don't know. It's not as cool as seeing up at the Berkeley Square, Yeah. And next, the next year they were doing 2 nights at the Warfield, which is the 3,000 seat room, and then they get the big record deal, and then they're on MTV, and all this stuff starts happening.
And then it's the Fillmore.
Yeah, totally. And the crazy thing is, everybody talks about Nirvana and all of that. And the funny part about that whole thing was the Seattle movement was happening at the exact same time. And I was never into that scene. I never liked that stuff, because I thought our scene was way cooler. I thought the Bay Area was doing this weird, funky, weird art rock thing. And like the grunge bands from Seattle were just like, it was all post Black Sabbath, classic rock. I didn't care. I thought it was kind of square. I didn't think it was that interesting. And I didn't like, the hair metal that it destroyed. I guess I kind of liked some of that when I was younger, but I didn't care about any of that. I was just like, so I figured our scene was going to be maybe the next thing.
Yeah.
After,
I really,
I could see that.
it kind of was, but it didn't, for some reason, the grunge thing struck a huge chord kind of worldwide and on a deeper level. I don't know.
Pop is popular. And I'd be lying if I didn't say that I was, of course I was about, probably 16 or 17 at that time when like Nevermind came out. But it's like I was a Midwestern kid too. So it's like what we're exposed to. But I was also a big fan of like Bungle, and but I really had to seek them out. I was like, we've talked about this before, Matt and I have another cast. Like back in the day, you had to like subscribe to zines, and you had to like really search out, what was going on. It started with a lot of like death metal that was coming out of the Bay Area, for me, but then finding Bungle eventually. But that's a really interesting connection, especially. Now I get it. Now I know why I like your shit so much.
Thanks. Yeah, those are
that all makes sense.
Yeah. And then of course, like, talk about seeking it out, like you're just describing. It was like like in addition to seeing the opening band for the other band that was not that would next become your favorite band, and then the band that would open for them would become your favorite band, you'd also read like in the zines and stuff, and they would talk about their favorite stuff.
Yeah.
You know, and I remember
that's what I grabbed.
I remember Les talking about.
Yep.
Yeah, and I remember Les talking about Tom Waits, and I didn't know what that was, you know, and like he says, they're all asking for their top 5 records. It was this weird thing in BAM magazine, and Les, I think I even remember what he said. He said Tom Waits, Rain Dogs. He said The Residents, Duck Stab. He said like 4 things, and I ran out and got all of them. And then I remember Lair, the guitar player from Primus, said King Crimson, Discipline.
Yes.
And he said, let me think about I can't believe I'm spacing now, but those were the big ones. Cause I remember I went out and bought King Crimson, Discipline. And that was just like, oh my God, the blueprints to the tombs of the ancient pyramids, you know? And then, the Tom Waits one was this really weird one. Cause I had stared at that album cover for Small Change. I just stared at it because it's so weird. He's like in that strip club backstage with that stripper. Like it's such a weird cover.
Yeah.
And he's just got his hands on his face like he's just down and out. And I just couldn't. I'm like, what does this mean? You know? And I would look at that, and then I was like, oh, that's that guy. That's that guy that Les was talking about. And he said Rain Dogs, but I ended up buying Small Change, and I brought it home and I put it on, and that was the most like shocking out of context music experience I've ever had. You know, Les is recommending this thing, so I'm thinking, okay, it's probably like The Residents, all weird and goofy, and then it's like this big orchestra comes in, this, you know, this, and then this voice comes in that's like, you know, post Louis Armstrong, just nightmare gravel scream. I'm like, what the hell's going on? Like this doesn't even fit together, you know? And I'd listened to that whole record a bunch of times, like trying to make myself like it because I didn't get it, and then I started understanding it, and then I started buying all the records, and then he became my whole blueprint for the next 5 years. Everything I was doing was Tom Waits informed, you know, and you know, we all go through those periods. In my band, Fabulous Hedgehogs, you know, we had that was a huge part of our sound, and that could have been the way I was singing, but I mean, musically, we didn't sound too much like that. We were way more kind of Zappa, Primus, Mr. Bungle,
a little rockabilly, maybe mixed in.
Rockabilly, Stray Cats, you know, old Chet Atkins or whatever, and Parliament Funkadelic. We were super funky, which was impossible to do with an upright bass, but that was all part of what we were, you know, shooting for.
Now you played Saw with Tom, didn't you?
I was supposed to. This is a great story. This is one of my favorite stories.
I thought I heard rumor about it, but then I wasn't sure.
Especially if you're a Tom Waits fan, this is like the greatest story. If you're not a Tom Waits fan, like this means nothing. But yeah, good. Okay, because I'll enjoy telling you this, because I get this call. This is in 2000, and this is so funny because this is when I was trying to make The Moon Is Disgusting, my record. I was like trying to do it by myself, kind of like I'm doing right now, and hitting this wall. Like I can't finish anything. I don't like the way anything sounds. Everything's too hard. Everything's too difficult. On my last record, it felt easier, you know, yada yada. But anyway, I get this call from a friend of mine, and I used to play in this group called the Billy Nair Show. And Corey Maccabee, these are some Bay Area legends. And these guys were a little ahead of me in the scene. They're about 10 years older than me at the time. And so they were another artist group that I really looked up to back then. And that can be a whole podcast on just these guys, because Corey's one of my favorite artists, musicians.
We love to have you back.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, go ahead.
He's the heavy. Yeah, totally. I will, because he's still making some of the most profound work. I think he's just such a badass. But anyway, I had worked with them in the 90s with this incredible engineer named Carl Durfler, who started working with Tom Waits. I didn't even know that because about 10 years had gone by. I had no idea. So I guess Tom Waits needs a saw player on this thing. And I get this call saying, hey, are you in town? He's looking for a saw player, but he only wants to call musicians that are around. He likes to, you know, kind of work quick. And if you're around, I'm going to give him your number. And I wasn't around, but lied and said I was. I said, I'm around. And I started driving home. I think I was somewhere else, because at that point I was pretty much living out of my van with my all my gear, and I was recording somewhere else. So I come back, and he says, I'm going to give him your number. He's looking for a saw player. I don't know any more details than that. It was very cryptic. I'm like, okay. And then I never hear anything. And so like a couple weeks goes by, and so I was like, whatever. At least he got to. Somebody said my name to Tom Waits. I mean, that's
cool
good enough.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. There was a conversation with somebody with Carl and Tom Waits, and my name was brought up, and he said, give him a call. That's totally good enough for me. Totally. And so then this is great. Like, I get this call from a blocked number, and I didn't pick it up. And not that I sit there and screen my calls. I think I just missed the call, but I get this call, and then I listen to the message, and it's him. And it's like, Mike Silverman, this is Tom Waits, like the whole deal. I'm looking for a saw player. I hear you're excellent. Oh yeah, I got it memorized, He goes, call us back, and he left a number. So I call back right away, and his assistant answers. She sounded real nice. And I go, oh, hi, there's Tom there, and she's like, oh yeah, he just tried to call you. Yeah, hold on one moment. And he gets on the phone. Couldn't be nicer. Just sweetest guy. And we start talking, and he's like, Carl tells me, you can play the saw. I'm like, I'd love to. And he goes, it's this sort of ballad thing, but I'm not sure yet. So it's like he didn't tell me exactly what it was. And then he goes, do you Carl tells me you play this other instrument that you invented. Like, thank God, maybe he'll have me come in. Yeah, I know, right? That's what I was hoping this would all lead to. So I started explaining the instrument to him, and I could tell he really is interested in it. And so then it gets towards the end of the conversation, and he goes, do you play any other instruments? And I said, well, actually, I've been playing upright bass my whole life, and the funny thing is I hadn't touched my bass in 6 years, and I'd say between 1991 and 2001, all I would have ever wanted to do was play bass with Tom Waits.
Yeah,
that would have been the dream gig for me. And I'm telling him I play bass, and I hadn't touched my bass in 5 years. So it was so weird. I mean, I could. So I'm feeling like I shouldn't even tell him to play bass, And he goes, oh, you play bass? He goes, do you play upright? And I go, well, yeah, that's actually what I started on. I'm an upright bass player. And he goes, oh, I love upright bass. I use it on all my records. I'm like, yeah, I know all your records. I know who all your bass players are. They're my Larry Taylor and all these guys, Greg Cohen. They're all my heroes, And then later he had Les play on, he had Les and Brain play on the Bone Machine record.
Bone Machine, yeah.
I'm just like, I know I didn't want to fan out on him too much, but so anyway, we make the date for the session, and I hang up the phone, and I'm like, wow, okay. So I go out, and I should buy a new saw, and I start practicing saw. I actually drop everything I'm doing, my recording, my album that I'm trying to do, all this stuff. I just drop it, and I start practicing saw like all day. And because I have all his records, and I was listening to some of his records that have saw on it to try to see what I thought.
There's the dog.
Maybe there's the dog. Yeah. It's got a surreal, almost filtered sound to it. I love it. I got to sample that.
Absolutely. You are welcome to sample my dog howling.
For my radio show drops.
Dang, Pops, what you got there?
Sorry.
So next time she howls, we'll just go silent.
We'll let her run.
Oh, yeah. And I'll put that through a Moog filter or something. But
you're practicing saw.
Oh, yeah. So I buy a saw. I start practicing every day, and I'm listening to his records, and I'm trying to kind of decipher what I think, or kind of imagine what I think he's going to want me to do. And, like on the Black Rider album, it's just like ghost sounds, it's nothing. I'm like, I can do that all day, and then there's a couple kind of melodic-y things on a different album. And I'm like, I could kind of do that. But I thought the best way to practice, and I was trying to learn a bunch of jazz standards and just like really try to expand my range so I could play melodically better, way more in tune, and it was actually a great experience. To practice the shit out of the saw, and I actually wrote a bunch of songs with it and stuff for myself, and So all this time goes by, and the date's approaching. I'm just like, all nervous. The day before the session, I missed another call from a blocked number. I'm going, uh-oh. I pick up the phone, and he's like, he had left me with a message. Mike, this is Tom. Listen, I changed my mind. Just bring your bass. And you're like, right?
Oh my God.
And I'm like, you gotta be
I
kidding
could have
me.
been practicing bass and caught back up.
It's like a prank, or it's like a bad prank, And I'm going, what am I going to do? Say no, Or what am I going to do? Tell them that I don't play anymore, kind of, So it's funny because my bass was in storage. It was in storage. So I go and I get my bass. It's like 2 a.m. I go and get my bass. And I'm getting anxiety thinking about this. Sorry. I take it out of its case, and it's just a mess. Like the bridge has been, if you don't touch your upright in a while, the wood changes and breathes and does weird stuff. The bridge moves. The action was all super high. It was way out of tune. There's a layer of dust, inside, inside the when you play coming out of the holes on the inside. And the worst part is my calluses were just gone. I didn't have calluses anymore because I play the magic pipe in some ways is it's harder to play than my bass, but it doesn't give me calluses. It gives me calluses, but they're different for some reason. When I was playing upright bass every day for every day, and I was playing 2 gigs a day in sessions every day, and I had these lobster hands, from the calluses, and I could. Yeah. It's a big part of your sound, actually. And I didn't have those, and I start practicing, and I'm going, God, my fingers are going to start bleeding. You know what I mean? This is like I just picked up the instrument for the first time. And so there was this part of me that's like, I should stay up all night and practice. And then I'm like, if I do that, I'm not going to be able to play for a week, So I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to go in there cold and just see what happens. It's like, if I'm going to rip up my hands, I might as well do it while Tom Waits is watching me and the tape. So I do. So I just put it away, and it was really liberating. It feels good to just say, let's just see what happens. I do that a lot in life. So I go to sleep, couldn't sleep very well. We're supposed to be there at noon. He has a session from like noon to 6. And I get there like really early. I get there at like 10 a.m. or something. And like Carl's there. And I hadn't seen him in 10 years. He's such a great guy. He's a sweet guy. He's like, oh, hey man, you're early. I'm like, yeah, I just figured I'd just be here and then I'd be ready. I'm like, can I just set up and then I can just be ready to go and then I've got to worry about anything? And he's like, no, man, just have a seat. He's like, you never know with this guy. He'll tell me that he's gonna, wants to, do a vocal track, and then he'll show up with 10 people to bang on trash cans, and Carl just can adapt, and I'm like, okay, cool. This will be fun. And so I hang out, and they all show up, and we do 2 songs. One was this blues tune, and it was really weird because it was in this really weird key, and my bass was in a weird tuning anyway. And so I just kind of held on for dear life and tried to play along. And this was my favorite part because he goes, I couldn't really hear where the changes were going, because I think he had tracked it with his son, and they were just bashing it out, and him and his son just have this telepathy, when they play. And so he can just follow them. They just play really well together. And he goes, hey, do you want me to do the vocal? You want me to do a vocal track, and then you can kind of know where it's headed? Because the vocals kind of telegraph where the changes are coming.
Yeah, it'd be awesome.
And I'm like, yeah, that'd be rad, So I sat there and watched him do a vocal track, which is just like, that's like, getting your PhD or something, just like, oh, this is how it does. This is how it's done. First take, just peeling the paint off the walls, just, just ripping so hard. And I was like, God, I just want to do this all day. I just want to watch this. So he does that. Then I go in there and I do my 2 passes of the tune, and I can't tell if I did it good or not. And then he's like, yeah, it's pretty good, And then he goes, okay, how about I teach you this ballad? We're a little ahead of schedule. And Carla, who's this incredible Carla Kielstead, this amazing violin player that I've actually known forever. I knew her way before this, and she had been playing with Tom Waits a ton. And so she was supposed to come and Joe Gore, this amazing guitar player, who was another guy who was a Bay Area legend who I'd for some reason never met, even though I was playing in the Bay all the time and I was kind of playing with everybody. But, some people just get busy. And so I was excited, but it was early and they weren't there yet. So Tom was going to teach me this song, and he's sitting on the couch with his little guitar and his yellow legal pad, and he's teaching.
I can
know. I know I sound like a total.
No.
Right.
But for me, it was this huge deal because it was a concert, It was a concert, and the coolest part was he was writing the tune. These are old songs. This is for the Bastards, Ballers, and Brawlers album, which is like a collection of songs he's had since the 70s, that he's either repurposing or re-recording or just like finding and just making good enough for the thing. And so he was doing this thing where he'd be like, I'm trying to follow his left hand and try to like learn this song. And he's like playing it for me. Oh, so you wait, hold on. Okay, let's try that again. I saw you in the morning. Wait, hold on. I saw you. And I'm just like stopping and starting and stopping. And I'm like, oh God, where were we again? And there's this part of me that's telling her that I'm not going to be able to do this. Maybe I'm going to screw it all up, But then the coolest thing was because he was relearning the song himself, it bought me like 20 times through the song, And so, so by the end, I kind of had it. I was like, oh, I could play this. I know where the bridge is. I know where it's coming. And I started like really love the song.
Oh, we just wrote it.
Yeah. It felt like band practice, with Tom Waits. And then Carla and Joe Gore show up, and he has to teach it to them. And they are such great musicians and players. They just learned it instantly. But that bought me still a couple more times through the tune. And then we went in there and we tracked it. We tracked it all together, and it was so fun, and it sounded really good. And it was really funny because at the end, we listened back to it. And I'm like, I made my way out. I'm looking at the clock. He had told me to bring my saw. That's another thing. He's like, bring your saw just in case. Maybe we'll get to it. And I'm like, okay. And I brought my saw, and it's just sitting there, and it's like 5:45, 5:50, 5:53. It's almost 6. And I'm like, okay, good. I don't think I have to do this, because I didn't know what I was going to have to do, And then he looks back and he sees my saw sitting there, and he goes, oh, we never got to the saw. I'm like, yeah. And he goes, I've been wanting to do Frank Sinatra's Young at Heart. And I tried to play it. We tried to record it with this other guy, and he couldn't even do it, and I'm like, Young at Heart. And I actually know that song really well. Like the changes in the chords, I would never dream of trying it on the saw. It just seems completely impossible, It's like it's like got a million words and changes and modulation and stuff. And I'm going there. I would have been in there just eating crap. You know what I mean? Like in front of him, that would have been the biggest nightmare in the world. I'm like, thank God, I didn't have to do that. Right. And then the other funny thing was, I built this belt that I put on so I can play the saw standing up. I don't know if you guys have seen me do that. It's got like these 2 pipes that stick out. So it's like, it's a weight belt. And so I can stand up, because normally you have to sit and put the saw between your knees. It's really hard. But so I can stand up, and I got these, these 2 things sticking out. He goes, what's that? That's this thing. I kind of invented that for the musical saw, so I can play standing up and I can walk around. He goes, weird. He's like, put it on. Let me see. I'm like, okay. So I put it on. He's like, wow. He's like, anyone ever call you Mikey Two Dicks? I go, no one's ever called me that. He goes, he goes into a whole like diatribe. He goes, I could see it though. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, Mikey Two Dicks he's going to take a little break and tip your waiters and waitresses, and then Mikey Two Dicks, he's going to come back and play you some more music. He started doing this whole thing, and I was just like, this is just like a gift from God, like he's roasting me, about my weird shit. And then my other favorite part on the way out. I got to say goodbye to Joe Gore, and I said, hey man, I just wanted to tell you, it was awesome to get to meet and play with you. I've actually been a fan forever. I actually saw his band play at Gathering of the Tribes when I was 16, and they had an upright bass player, an electric upright bass player, who's this other guy that I ended up becoming good friends with later. But he was the first guy I saw play like rock and roll funk on an upright bass, you know. Mm-hmm. And I was telling him that whole thing. He's like, "Oh yeah, that I remember Bill, and I remember this, and I remember that." And he goes, "Yeah, it was fun. It was a good session today." And I go, "Was it?" I couldn't tell, you know. He seemed like it was good enough, you know. And he goes, no. He's like most of this. He's like, I've done 6 records with him, and about 80% of the time he just sends everybody home because it just working out. So the fact that it got recorded, and he's like, he liked it. I'm like, oh, that's the greatest. This is all I needed. This is all I needed forever, you know.
So what happened to the track?
Yeah. What's that?
So did the track get released then?
Oh yeah. So the record comes out. It's the record came out, and they sent me a copy of it. It shows up in the mail. It's a 3 CD set of all these songs. And so I had recorded the 2 songs. That blues thing that I did the first time, I can't really hear me in there. I don't know if I made the cut or not. And I think it ended up just pretty much being guitar and drums and just him screaming. It's killer. It's the opening track on the first thing. It's probably one of my favorite songs on the record. But then the ballad that we did that he showed me, taught me how to do and everything, that is really cool. And you can really hear my bass, which is kind of nice. Actually, I play, that's the irony of it is I played really good. And I think it's because I wasn't good anymore. Right. Like I wasn't good anymore, so I couldn't play a bunch of shit. Usually I kind of
it's like there's no point putting that pressure on yourself.
Yeah, there's no point putting pressure. And it took everything I had just to play in tune. And I have a real high standard for kind of playing in tune and having a good sound with like good intonation, Mm-hmm. If you're not doing that, then what's the point? And so I was putting all my energy into really just trying to nail the notes, and I didn't have any extra skill to go, like runs and kind of show off. Which if he would have called me in 1997, maybe I would have just played too much and maybe ruined the track. So it's almost like maybe that's an instinct he has to know who to pick that's going to serve the song the best way, and it was this incredible lesson. And then the final piece of the puzzle is me being blown away by the fact that we had done 2 songs completed in just that one little afternoon session with Carl. And I went up to Carl and said, "Hey man, can you record my next record? Because I want to do it like this. I want to do it in a couple of days instead of a couple of years, which it's taken me."